Marcus Webb had not expected the phone call that would drag him back to the place he swore he would never return to. The voice on the other end belonged to Patricia Simmons, the estate attorney handling his late father's affairs. Her tone was measured, professional, tinged with the kind of practiced sympathy that came from delivering bad news to strangers. James Webb had passed away 3 weeks prior from complications related to pneumonia. The funeral had already taken place. Marcus had not been notified in time, or perhaps at all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you are tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you are subscribed, because tomorrow I have saved something extra special for you. The house, a modest ranch-style property on the outskirts of Ridgemont, Colorado, now sat empty, waiting for someone to decide its fate. Marcus stood in his small apartment in Austin, Texas, the phone pressed against his ear, listening to Patricia explain the legalities of inheritance and probate. Through the window, the city sprawled beneath an unforgiving sun, glass and steel reflecting light in sharp, blinding angles. He had built a life here, such as it was, a job as a security consultant for a tech firm, a gym membership he used religiously, a routine that kept the past at a safe, manageable distance. The news of his father's death arrived not as a wave of grief, but as a dull, expected thud, like the sound of a book falling from a high shelf in an empty room. He told Patricia he would handle it. He would return to Ridgemont, assess the property, and make the necessary arrangements. It was a mission, nothing more. Secure the asset, liquidate, extract. He had done harder things in harder places. The drive from Austin to Ridgemont took 2 days. Marcus drove alone, the highway stretching endlessly before him, a grey ribbon cutting through the heart of the country. His only companion was Ranger, a 7-year-old Belgian Malinois, with a coat the color of burnt caramel and eyes like polished amber. Ranger had been his partner during his final deployment in the Middle East, a military working dog trained in explosives detection and patrol. When Marcus left the service, he had adopted Ranger through a veteran assistance program. The dog was more than a pet. He was a brother in arms, a living reminder of a time when Marcus had purpose, clarity, and a team he could trust. Ranger sat in the passenger seat, his head resting on the edge of the open window, ears perked, nose sampling the changing air. He was calm, disciplined, but alert. Marcus appreciated that about him. There were no surprises with Ranger, no hidden agendas, just loyalty, pure and uncomplicated. As they crossed into Colorado, the landscape shifted. The flat expanse of Texas gave way to rolling hills, then to the jagged peaks of the Rockies in the distance. The air grew thinner, cooler. Marcus felt a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with altitude. He had left Ridgemont 20 years ago at the age of 18, fresh out of high school, with nothing but a duffel bag and a one-way ticket to basic training. He had not looked back. He had not called. He had not written. He had severed the connection cleanly, surgically, because staying would have meant drowning in the silence that filled every corner of that house. His father, James Webb, had been a man of few words, a career postal worker. He had spent 30 years delivering mail in the same small mountain town, walking the same routes, nodding politely to the same faces. He was reliable, punctual, unremarkable. After Marcus's mother died when Marcus was 9, the silence in the house had become suffocating. James did not speak about her. He did not speak about anything that mattered. He provided meals, paid bills, ensured Marcus went to school, but there was no warmth, no connection, no bridge between them. Marcus grew up feeling like a tenant in his own home, tolerated but not wanted. The incident that finally broke him happened when Marcus was 17. He had been caught shoplifting a pair of headphones from a local electronics store. It was a stupid, impulsive act born of teenage boredom and a desperate need for attention. The store owner, a kind man named Mr. Carver, had called James instead of the police, offering Marcus a chance to work off the debt. James had arrived at the store, listened to Mr. Carver's proposal, and simply nodded. On the drive home, he said nothing, not a word, not a lecture, not a reprimand, not even a question, just silence. That silence felt like condemnation, like a door slamming shut on any hope of connection. Marcus interpreted it as proof of what he had always suspected. His father did not care. The military had saved him. It gave him structure, purpose, a tribe. He excelled in the Rangers, earned commendations, became the kind of soldier others looked up to. He learned to compartmentalize, to lock away the past in a vault deep in his mind, where it could not touch him. But now, driving through the familiar streets of Ridgemont, past the old high school, past the coffee shop where he used to spend hours avoiding home, the vault was cracking open. He turned onto Pinecrest Drive, a quiet street lined with modest homes and towering ponderosa pines. The house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, a single-story ranch with faded beige siding and a brown shingled roof. The lawn was overgrown, the flower beds choked with weeds. It looked smaller than he remembered, shrunken somehow, as if the years had compressed it. He parked the truck in the driveway, the engine ticking as it cooled. Ranger hopped out, stretching his long legs, sniffing the unfamiliar ground with methodical interest. Marcus stood on the cracked concrete driveway, staring at the front door. The key was under the ceramic turtle planter on the porch, exactly where it had always been. Some things never changed. He retrieved it, the metal cold and heavy in his palm, and unlocked the door. The smell hit him first. Stale air, dust and something faintly medicinal. The house had the particular emptiness of a place where someone had died alone. He stepped inside, Ranger close behind, and closed the door. The living room was dim, curtains drawn. The furniture was the same brown corduroy couch, the same glass coffee table with the chipped corner, the same framed photograph of his mother on the mantel above a fireplace that had not held a fire in decades. She smiled out from behind the glass, frozen in time, forever young. Marcus set his duffel bag down and walked through the house, conducting a silent inventory. The kitchen was clean but dated. The hallway bathroom still had the same avocado green tiles from the 70s. His old bedroom had been converted into a storage room, boxes stacked neatly against the walls. His father's bedroom was sparse, almost monastic, a neatly made bed, a nightstand with a lamp and a digital clock. A dresser with nothing on top, no personal effects, no clutter, no evidence of a life lived with passion or joy. He had a plan. 3 days. Day 1, walk through and document everything. Day 2, begin sorting and packing anything of value. Day 3, contact a realtor and an estate sale company. Then he would leave. He would return to Austin, to his controlled, predictable life, and this place would become someone else's problem. It was efficient, it was clean, it was the only way he knew how to handle things. But Ranger had other plans. From the moment they entered the house, the dog had been restless. Ranger was not a nervous animal. He had been trained to remain calm under fire, to focus on his task even in chaos. But here, in the quiet stillness of the house, he was agitated. He paced from room to room, his nose to the floor, sniffing intently along baseboards and under furniture. He paused at doorways, ears swiveling, listening to sounds Marcus could not hear. When Marcus sat down on the couch to rest, Ranger refused to settle. He circled the living room, whining softly, a low, persistent sound that grated on Marcus's nerves. "Easy, Ranger, stand down." Marcus's voice was firm but gentle. The dog looked at him, amber eyes bright and urgent, then turned and trotted down the hallway toward the back of the house. Marcus sighed and followed. Ranger stopped at a narrow door at the end of the hallway, just past the bathroom. It was the door to the basement. Marcus remembered it vaguely. His father had used the basement for storage. Old holiday decorations, boxes of paperwork, tools. He had warned Marcus as a child to stay out of it. The stairs were steep, the lighting poor, and there was nothing down there worth seeing. Marcus had obeyed without question, content to avoid another silent reprimand. Now, Ranger stood at the door, his body tense, tail rigid. He scratched lightly at the wood with one paw, a deliberate, controlled gesture. Then he turned to Marcus, sat down, and stared at him with an intensity that could not be ignored. It was a signal, the same signal he used in the field when he detected something worth investigating. Marcus frowned. "There is nothing down there, boy. Just junk." Ranger did not move. He simply stared, waiting. Marcus felt a flicker of irritation. He was tired. He was emotionally drained. He did not have the energy for this, but he also knew better than to dismiss Ranger's instincts. In the field, that dog had saved lives. If Ranger thought something was worth investigating, it probably was. Fine. Let's take a look. He opened the door. A waft of cool, stale air rose from the darkness below. He fumbled for the light switch, flipping it on. A bare bulb at the bottom of the stairs flickered to life, casting weak yellowish light into the gloom. The wooden stairs were narrow and steep, just as he remembered. He descended carefully, Ranger immediately behind him, the dog's claws clicking softly on each step. The basement was exactly as he expected. Low ceilings, concrete floor, walls lined with metal shelving units holding cardboard boxes and plastic bins. There was a workbench along one wall, cluttered with old tools, paint cans and coils of electrical wire. Everything was coated in a fine layer of dust. It smelled of damp concrete and mildew. There was nothing remarkable about it. Nothing worth the dog's intense focus. See, nothing. Just storage. Marcus gestured around the room, as if to prove his point. But Ranger ignored him. The dog moved with purpose, weaving through the shelves, his nose working overtime. He circled the perimeter of the room, pausing occasionally to sniff deeply at a particular spot, then moving on. Marcus watched, arms crossed, waiting for the dog to satisfy his curiosity so they could go back upstairs. But Ranger did not lose interest. Instead, his focus narrowed. He stopped at the far wall, the section between two tall shelving units. It was a blank wall, unremarkable, just bare concrete like the rest. But Ranger would not leave it alone. He sniffed along the seam where the wall met the floor, whining again, louder this time. Then he sat down, looked back at Marcus, and barked once.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
A sharp, commanding sound. Marcus walked over, crouching down beside the dog. "What is it? What do you smell?" He ran his hand along the wall. It felt solid, cold. He tapped it with his knuckles. The sound that came back was wrong. Not the dense, heavy thud of solid concrete, but a hollow, resonant knock, like knocking on a door. Marcus froze. He tapped again, moving his hand a foot to the left. Thud, solid. A foot to the right. Thud, solid. Back to the center. Knock, hollow. His pulse quickened. He stood up, scanning the wall more carefully. The concrete looked uniform, the same dull gray as the rest of the basement. But now that he was looking closely, he could see faint lines, almost invisible, forming a rectangular outline about 3 feet wide and 6 feet tall. The lines were too straight, too precise to be cracks. He turned to the workbench, scanning the clutter for something he could use. His eyes landed on a heavy pry bar, its metal surface flecked with rust. He grabbed it, the weight familiar and reassuring in his hand. He moved the shelving units aside, scraping them across the concrete floor with a metallic screech that echoed in the small space with the area cleared. He wedged the flat end of the pry bar into one of the faint seams. He put his weight into it, muscles straining. The concrete did not budge. He repositioned, found a better angle, and tried again. This time something gave. A thin crack appeared, widening slightly. Dust sifted down. He worked the pry bar along the seam, prying and pulling, the sound of scraping metal filling the air. With a sudden sharp crack, a section of the wall shifted inward. Not concrete at all. It was a panel, expertly disguised to look like part of the foundation, but constructed from reinforced plywood covered in a thin layer of concrete veneer. He pulled harder, and the entire panel swung open on hidden hinges, revealing a dark opening beyond. Marcus stepped back, breathing hard, staring at the impossible. A secret door, built into the basement wall of his father's house, hidden for who knew how long. Ranger, calmer now that his work was done, stood beside him, tail wagging slightly, as if to say, "I told you so." Marcus's mind raced. His father, the quiet postal worker, the man who lived a life of predictable routine, had built a secret room in his basement. The questions came fast and chaotic. When? Why? What was hidden in there? He felt a strange mix of emotions, curiosity, yes, but also anger. Another secret, another wall between them. Even in death, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a short passageway, maybe 6 feet long, leading to another space beyond. The walls of the passage were smooth, lined with wood paneling. It was clean, deliberate construction, not a rushed job, but something planned and executed with care. He stepped through the opening, ducking slightly to clear the frame. Ranger followed, staying close. The passageway opened into a room, and Marcus swept the flashlight beam across the space, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. He felt along the wall near the entrance and found a switch. He flipped it. Overhead lights flickered on, fluorescent tubes humming to life, flooding the room with cold white light. Marcus stood motionless, his breath caught in his throat. The room was not a storage area. It was not a shelter. It was a workshop, but not the kind of workshop he had ever imagined his father would have. The space was about 15 feet by 20 feet, with concrete walls painted a clean white and a smooth sealed concrete floor. The air was dry, climate controlled. Along one wall was a long workbench made of heavy plywood, its surface worn but meticulously clean. Above the bench, a pegboard covered the entire wall, and hanging from it, organized with military precision, was a collection of tools unlike anything Marcus had seen outside of a professional jeweler's studio. There were rows of small hammers, files, and pliers, each one a different size and shape, each hanging in its designated spot, outlined in black marker. There were magnifying glasses on articulated arms, tiny anvils, and delicate engraving tools. There were jars filled with screws, pins and springs, all labeled in his father's neat handwriting. At the far end of the bench sat a watchmaker's lathe, a precision machine for turning tiny metal parts. Beside it was a polishing wheel and a collection of buffing compounds. Everything was dust-free, cared for, ready to be used, but it was the objects on the shelves along the opposite wall that truly stunned him. Displayed on custom-built wooden shelves, arranged with the care of museum pieces, were dozens of clocks and watches, not modern quartz watches, but mechanical timepieces, pocket watches with ornate cases, vintage wrist watches with leather bands, mantle clocks with brass gears visible through glass panels, even a tall, elegant grandfather clock standing in the corner, its pendulum still and silent. Some were complete, their faces pristine, their hands frozen at different times. Others were in various stages of repair or assembly, their inner workings exposed, gears and springs laid out beside them like the components of a tiny, intricate machine. Marcus walked slowly along the shelves, his mind struggling to reconcile what he was seeing with the man he thought he knew. His father had been a mailman. He fixed leaky faucets with duct tape. He drove a 15-year-old sedan. He ate frozen dinners and watched reruns of old westerns on television. He was not an artist. He was not a craftsman. He certainly was not a master horologist. But the evidence was undeniable. The precision of the tools, the care taken in organizing them, the sheer number and quality of the timepieces, all pointed to someone who had spent years, perhaps decades, honing a skill in secret. This was not a hobby. This was a passion. This was a life's work, hidden away from the world. Marcus picked up one of the pocket watches from the shelf. It was heavy, solid silver, its case engraved with an intricate floral pattern. He pressed the small button at the top, and the case popped open. Inside, the face was immaculate, white enamel with Roman numerals in black. He carefully turned it over, opening the back case. The movement inside was a miniature marvel, dozens of tiny gears, perfectly meshed, springs coiled with tension, jeweled bearings gleaming like tiny rubies. Every component was polished, flawless. He turned the crown, and the watch came to life. The gears began to move, smooth and silent, the second hand sweeping across the face with elegant precision. He set the watch down gently, his hands trembling slightly. He looked around the room again, seeing it with new eyes. This was not just a workshop. This was a sanctuary. This was where his father had come to be himself, to escape the world, to create something beautiful and precise in a life that had otherwise been mundane and silent. On the workbench, partially disassembled, was a wristwatch. Beside it, a small notebook lay open, its pages filled with technical diagrams and notes in his father's tight, controlled handwriting. Marcus picked up the notebook, flipping through the pages. It was a repair log. Each entry documented a watch that had been brought in for service, though there was no indication of where these watches had come from or who had brought them. The entries were clinical, technical, balance wheel out of true, adjusted and reseated, mainspring barrel cracked, replaced with new stock, dial refinished, hands relumed. But as he continued to flip through the pages, he began to notice something else. Scattered among the technical notes were other entries, shorter, written in the same hand, but with a different tone. They were not about watches. They were personal reflections, fragments of thoughts, written as if his father was speaking to someone. March 10th. The Elgin pocket watch came out beautifully. Runs within 2 seconds a day now. I wish I could show you, Anne. You always said I had steady hands. I think you would be proud. Anne. His mother's name. Marcus's heart clenched. He turned the page. June 5th. Found a Longines at the estate sale over in Boulder. Movement is a mess, but the case is perfect. Marcus would be 24 now. I wonder if he still has that old Timex I gave him for his 12th birthday. Probably not. Probably threw it away. Marcus closed his eyes, trying to steady his breathing. He had not thrown it away. He still had that watch, tucked in a drawer somewhere in his apartment in Austin, a cheap scratched Timex with a frayed nylon band. He had never worn it, but he had kept it, though he could not have said why. He kept reading, the notebook now feeling less like a repair log and more like a confession. August 12th. Bad day. Dropped a balance staff and spent 3 hours making a replacement. My hands are not what they used to be. Getting old, Anne. Miss you. The house is too quiet. I left the porch light on again tonight, just in case. September 20th. Finished the restoration on the Hamilton Railway watch. Beautiful piece. Strong, reliable, like Marcus. I hope wherever he is okay. I hope he knows I am proud of him. I do not know how to tell him. I never did. Marcus's vision blurred. He set the notebook down carefully, as if it were made of glass. He walked to the corner of the room and leaned against the wall, pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes. The words on those pages were unraveling everything he thought he knew. His father had not been indifferent. He had been heartbroken. The silence had not been a lack of love. It had been the sound of a man who did not know how to express what he felt. Ranger came over and sat beside him, leaning his solid weight against Marcus's leg. Marcus reached down and buried his fingers in the dog's fur, grounding himself. He stood there for a long time, just breathing, trying to process the magnitude of what he had found.
Finally, he forced himself to move. He walked back to the shelves, examining the other timepieces. Some were clearly projects his father had been working on. Others looked like finished pieces, waiting for something. At the far end of the shelf, tucked behind a row of pocket watches, was a small wooden box. It was made of cherry wood, expertly dovetailed at the corners with a hinged lid. Marcus lifted it carefully and opened it. Inside, resting on a bed of dark velvet, was a wristwatch. It was different from the others. It was not a vintage piece or a restoration project. It was custom-built, handmade from scratch. The case was machined from stainless steel, brushed to a matte finish. The dial was simple, elegant, with thin black hands and minimalist hour markers. The movement, visible through a sapphire crystal on the back, was a work of art. Every bridge was hand-finished, beveled and polished. The balance wheel oscillated with perfect rhythm, its movement mesmerizing. It was a masterpiece, the kind of watch that would sell for tens of thousands of dollars if made by a renowned Swiss atelier. Tucked into the lid of the box was a small card, yellowed with age. Marcus pulled it out. Written in his father's hand were 4 words: "For Marcus, come home." The card was dated 5 years ago. Marcus stood there, holding the watch, his father's final silent message cradled in his hands. The enormity of it all crashed over him. His father had not been cold. He had not been indifferent. He had been waiting, building, hoping, pouring all of his unspoken love into gears and springs, into the precise meditative work of creating something that would last, something that could be passed down, something that said without words, "I see you, I am proud of you. Please come back." And Marcus had never come back. Not once in 20 years. He sank down onto the stool by the workbench, the watch still in his hands, and for the first time since he was a boy, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of his grief. Not the performative grief expected at funerals, but the raw, searing pain of loss. The loss of his father, yes, but more than that, the loss of all the years they could have had. The loss of conversations never held, of understanding never reached, of a connection that had been there all along, hidden beneath layers of silence and misunderstanding. Ranger rested his head on Marcus's knee, his amber eyes soft and knowing. Marcus looked down at the dog, then back at the watch in his hands, and he understood. He had come here to close a chapter, to sell a house and move on. But what he had found was something far more profound. He had found his father, the real man, not the silent figure he had spent 20 years resenting, but a man who had loved deeply, who had struggled to express that love, and who had spent his life creating beauty in the only language he knew. Marcus carefully placed the watch back in its box and set it on the workbench. He looked around the room, at the tools, the timepieces, the notebook. This was not a place to be emptied and sold. This was a legacy, and he had a choice to make. He could walk away as he had planned and let this room, this story, be lost to time, or he could stay. He could learn. He could finish what his father had started. He thought of the half-repaired watches, the projects left incomplete. He thought of the custom watch in the box, the one meant for him. He thought of the years of silence and the years of hidden love, and he knew, with a clarity that felt like waking from a long sleep, that he could not leave. Not yet. Not like this. Marcus stood up, his decision made. He would stay in Ridgemont. He would take time off from work. He would learn his father's craft. He would pick up the tools his father had laid down, and he would finish the work. Not because he had to, but because it was the only way he knew to say the words that his father had never been able to say, and that he had never been able to hear. "I love you. I see you. I understand." He walked to the pegboard and ran his hand along the row of tiny hammers and files. They were cold, inert, waiting. He selected a small screwdriver, its wooden handle worn smooth from years of use, and held it up to the light. It felt right in his hand, balanced and purposeful. He carried it back to the workbench and sat down on the stool. In front of him was the partially disassembled wristwatch, its movements spread out in careful order. Beside it, the open notebook, his father's instructions written in meticulous detail. He took a deep breath, picked up the movement, and examined it closely. The balance wheel was out of alignment, just as the notebook said. He would need to adjust it, a delicate operation requiring patience and a steady hand. He had no formal training, no experience, but he had his father's tools, his father's notes, and something more. He had the same steady hands, the same capacity for focus, the same need to create order out of chaos. Ranger settled onto a folded blanket in the corner of the room, his watchful eyes never leaving his master. The room was silent, except for the soft hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint rhythmic ticking of the clocks on the shelves, a symphony of time passing, time saved, time honored. Marcus began to work. His movements were hesitant at first, uncertain. He consulted the notebook frequently, cross-referencing diagrams, reading his father's notes over and over. But as the minutes turned into hours, something shifted. His hands grew steadier. His focus deepened. The world outside the room, the grief, the regret, the 20 years of distance, all of it faded away. There was only the work. The tiny screws, the delicate gears, the precise adjustments. It was meditative, almost spiritual. He understood now why his father had spent so much time down here. It was not an escape. It was a place of clarity, a place where complexity could be tamed, where broken things could be made whole. As he worked, he thought about the man his father had been, not the silent figure at the dinner table, but the craftsman in this hidden room. A man who understood that some things could not be said with words, but had to be built, piece by piece, with patience and love. A man who had made mistakes, who had struggled to connect, but who had never stopped trying in his own quiet, steadfast way. Marcus thought about his own life, the years in the military, the missions, the discipline, the distance he had maintained from everyone and everything. He had been running, he realized, just as he had run from this house 20 years ago. Running from connection, from vulnerability, from the risk of being hurt or disappointed. But sitting here, in his father's workshop, surrounded by the tangible evidence of a love that had endured in silence, he understood that running had cost him more than staying ever could have. He adjusted the balance wheel, turning the tiny screw with infinite care. The movement came back into alignment. He reassembled the watch, placing each component back in its proper place, following the sequence his father had documented. When the last screw was tightened, he held the watch up to his ear. The ticking was steady, rhythmic, perfect. It was alive. He set the watch down and leaned back, exhausted but satisfied. It was well past midnight. He had been working for hours without realizing it. Ranger was asleep in the corner, his breathing deep and even. Marcus looked around the room one more time, and he smiled, a small, sad smile, but a real one. He stood up, stretched, and turned off the lights. He left the secret door open. There was no need to hide it anymore. He climbed the stairs, Ranger trailing behind him, and made his way to his old bedroom. He cleared a space on the floor, unrolled his sleeping bag, and lay down. Sleep came quickly, deep and dreamless. The next morning, Marcus woke to sunlight streaming through the dusty window. He lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, feeling something he had not felt in a long time. Not happiness, exactly, but something close, a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging. He got up, made coffee in the old percolator his father had used, and sat at the kitchen table. Ranger ate his breakfast from a bowl on the floor, then came and sat beside Marcus, resting his head on Marcus's knee. "Okay, boy," We have got work to do. Marcus spent the morning exploring the rest of the house with new eyes. He was no longer cataloguing assets to be sold. He was looking for his father. He found him everywhere. In the neat rows of canned goods in the pantry, each label facing forward. In the perfectly folded towels in the linen closet. In the collection of old Western novels on the bookshelf, their spines creased from repeated reading. His father had been a man who valued order, routine and quiet persistence. Marcus understood that now. He had inherited those same traits. In the afternoon, Marcus returned to the workshop. He had decided to tackle another project. There was a mantel clock on the shelf, a beautiful piece from the 1930s, with an Art Deco design. According to the notebook, the mainspring was broken. Marcus had never replaced a mainspring before, but his father's notes were detailed. He would figure it out. He had time. As he worked, he thought about what Ben Holloway, if such a person existed in Ridgemont, might say. He imagined visiting the local hardware store, introducing himself, asking about his father. He wondered if anyone in town had known about the workshop, about the watches. He doubted it. His father had been a private man. This had been his secret, his refuge, and now it was Marcus's inheritance. Over the following days, Marcus fell into a rhythm. Mornings were spent maintaining the house. Afternoons and evenings were spent in the workshop. He taught himself the fundamentals of horology, using his father's tools, his father's notes, and a growing collection of books he ordered online. He repaired watches, he cleaned movements. He learned the language of gears and escapements, of jewels and balance springs. It was difficult, frustrating at times, but also deeply satisfying. Every completed repair felt like a small victory. A conversation continued, a connection restored. Ranger adapted to the new routine with ease. He seemed content, calmer than he had been in months. He spent his days exploring the property, chasing squirrels, and napping in the sun. At night, he would join Marcus in the workshop, lying on his blanket, a silent, comforting presence. Marcus also began to read his father's notebook more thoroughly. Beyond the technical notes and the brief personal reflections, he found something else. Tucked into the back pages were letters, not letters that had been sent, but letters that had been written and never mailed. They were addressed to Marcus. The first was dated 10 years ago. Dear Marcus, I do not know if you will ever read this. I do not know where you are or if you ever think of this place. I saw on the news that your unit was deployed overseas. I am worried, but I am also proud. You have become the kind of man I always hoped you would be. Strong, brave, honorable. I wish I had told you that when you were here. I wish I had told you a lot of things. I was not a good father. I know that. After your mother died, I did not know how to be anything other than what I was. A man who kept things running, who put food on the table, who made sure you had what you needed. But I did not give you what you needed most. I did not give you my time, my attention, my words. I am sorry for that. I hope you are safe. I hope you come home someday. Your father. Marcus read the letter 3 times, his throat tight. He folded it carefully and moved on to the next. There were more. Letters written on birthdays, on holidays, on quiet Sunday afternoons. Each one a small window into his father's heart. Each one an apology, a hope, a quiet declaration of love that had never been spoken aloud. Marcus read them all, and with each one the wall of resentment he had built over 20 years crumbled a little more. One letter stood out. It was dated 2 years ago, written in a shakier hand. Dear Marcus, my hands are not what they used to be. The arthritis is getting worse. I can still do simple repairs, but the fine work is becoming difficult. I am afraid I will not be able to finish the watch I am making for you. I started it 5 years ago, and I have poured everything I know into it.
It is the best work I have ever done. I wanted it to be perfect. I wanted you to have something that would last, something that would remind you that I was here, that I cared, even if I was too much of a coward to say it when it mattered. If you ever come home, if you ever find this place, please know that I tried. I tried to be a better father than I was. I tried to build something worthy of you. I hope it is enough. I love you, son. I always have. Dad. Marcus set the letter down and covered his face with his hands. The grief was overwhelming, a tidal wave that swept away the last of his defenses. He wept. Not the silent, controlled grief of a soldier, but the raw, unrestrained sobs of a son who had lost something precious before he ever knew he had it. Ranger came to him immediately, pressing his warm body against Marcus's legs, whining softly. The dog's presence was an anchor, the only thing keeping Marcus from being swept away entirely. He wrapped his arms around Ranger's neck and held on, letting the years of pain and misunderstanding pour out of him. When the storm finally passed, Marcus sat back, exhausted but strangely lighter. He looked at the letters spread out on the workbench, at his father's careful handwriting, and he made a decision. He would not just repair the watches his father had left unfinished. He would complete the custom watch, the one made for him, the one his father had started 5 years ago, with hope in his heart and trembling hands. He opened the cherrywood box again and lifted out the watch. He examined it closely under the magnifying lamp. The movement was complete, fully functional. The case was finished, beautifully machined, but the dial was blank. His father had not added the hour markers or the hands. Perhaps he had been waiting, wanting to personalize it, wanting to make it uniquely Marcus's, or perhaps his hands had simply given out before he could complete the final, most delicate steps. Marcus consulted the notebook, searching for any notes about the watch. On one of the last pages, he found a sketch. His father had drawn several possible dial designs, each one slightly different, but one was circled. It was simple, elegant, thin batons for hour markers, dolphin-style hands, a small second sub-dial at 6 o'clock. At the 12 o'clock position, where a brand name would normally go, his father had written in tiny letters, not a company name, but 2 words, "Welcome home." Marcus stared at the sketch for a long time. His father had been building this for years, pouring his love into every component, planning every detail, hoping that one day Marcus would return and receive it. And now Marcus was here, but his father was gone. The cruelty of the timing was almost unbearable, but he could still finish it. He could still honor his father's vision. He could still say, in the language his father understood best, "I hear you. I see what you were trying to tell me. Thank you." Over the next several weeks, Marcus threw himself into the work with an intensity he had not felt since his military days. He researched dial making, studying techniques used by master craftsmen. He ordered supplies, tiny tubes of luminous paint, precision decals, specialized adhesives. He practiced on scrap dials first, learning to apply the markers with steady hands, learning to position them with perfect symmetry. It was painstaking work, requiring patience and focus, but Marcus had both in abundance. During this time, he also began to venture out into Ridgemont more. He visited the local diner, the hardware store, the post office where his father had worked for 3 decades. He introduced himself, not as the son who had run away, but simply as James Webb's son, home to settle the estate. The responses surprised him. People remembered his father fondly. The waitress at the diner said he had come in every Saturday morning for coffee and pie, always leaving a generous tip. The clerk at the hardware store said James had been one of their best customers, always knowing exactly what he needed, never wasting time. The postmaster, a woman named Helen Ortiz, who had worked alongside his father for 15 years, invited Marcus to sit down in her small office. "Your father was a good man," she said, her voice warm. "Quiet, yes, but dependable. He never missed a day of work in all the years I knew him. And he cared about people.
He would notice if someone on his route was struggling, if their mail was piling up, or if they seemed unwell. He would check on them, make sure they were okay. He never made a fuss about it. That was just who he was. Marcus listened, absorbing this new information. His father had not been cold or indifferent. He had been reserved, yes, but also observant, caring in his own understated way. The man the town knew was not so different from the man in the workshop. Both versions of his father had been defined by quiet competence, by showing care through actions rather than words. "Did he ever talk about me?" Marcus asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. Helen smiled gently. "All the time. He was so proud of you. He kept a photo of you in uniform pinned to his locker. Whenever there was news about military operations overseas, he would come to me, worried, asking if I had heard anything. I would tell him no news was good news, and he would nod, but I could see it weighed on him. He loved you very much, Marcus. I hope you know that." Marcus nodded, unable to speak. He thanked her and left, walking slowly back to the house. Ranger trotted beside him, occasionally looking up as if to check that his master was okay. The pieces were falling into place. The picture of his father was becoming clearer, more complete. He had not been a perfect man, but he had been a good one. A man who had done his best with the tools he had, who had loved deeply even if he could not express it in the ways Marcus had needed as a child. Back in the workshop, Marcus continued his work on the watch. The dial was complete now, the markers applied with precision, the tiny lettering at 12 o'clock painted in crisp white. "Welcome home." He had attached the hands, delicate spears of blued steel, that caught the light beautifully. The watch was nearly finished. All that remained was to assemble it, to place the movement into the case, seal it and set it running. He worked late into the night, his movements careful and deliberate. Ranger slept in the corner, his breathing a steady rhythm in the quiet room. When the final screw was tightened and the case back was sealed, Marcus held the watch up to the light. It was perfect. A masterpiece, a collaboration between father and son, bridging the gap of years and silence. He wound the crown, setting the watch running. The second hand began to sweep across the dial, smooth and continuous. He held it to his ear and listened to the heartbeat of the movement, the soft rhythmic ticking that his father had engineered with love and skill. It was alive. It was a piece of his father, preserved and perfected. Marcus sat there for a long time, holding the watch, feeling its weight in his hand. It was more than a timepiece. It was a message from beyond the grave, a final gift, a benediction. His father's voice, speaking through metal and precision. "You are home. You are loved. You are forgiven." He carefully placed the watch back in its cherry wood box and set it on the shelf beside the other timepieces. Tomorrow he would wear it. Tomorrow he would begin the next chapter. But tonight he simply sat in the workshop, surrounded by his father's legacy, and felt for the first time in 20 years that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The room was silent except for the ticking of the clocks, a symphony of time honored and preserved. Ranger stirred in his sleep, dreaming of open fields and clear missions, and Marcus, the soldier who had spent 2 decades running from his past, finally stopped running. He had found what he was looking for, not in distant battlefields or crowded cities, but here in a hidden room beneath his childhood home, in the patient work of his father's hands, in the silent language of love that he had finally learned to understand. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor that Marcus had scrubbed clean the day before. He sat at the small wooden table, the custom watch on his wrist, its weight a constant reminder of the man who had made it. Ranger lay at his feet, content and still, his amber eyes occasionally flickering open to check on his master before drifting closed again. Marcus had been in Ridgemont for 6 weeks now. What was supposed to be a 3-day operation had transformed into something else entirely. He had called his employer in Austin, requested an extended leave of absence, and been granted it without question. His supervisor, a former Marine who understood the weight of family matters, had simply said, "Take all the time you need." Marcus had no idea how much time that would be. For the first time in his adult life, he was not operating on a timeline. He was simply living, day by day, in the house that was slowly becoming a home. He had spent the previous evening organizing the workshop, cataloging every timepiece, every tool, every component. It was a habit born of military discipline, but it also felt like an act of respect, a way of honoring the order his father had created. As he worked, he had noticed something unusual. Several of the watches on the shelves had small tags attached to them, handwritten labels with names and dates. Mrs. Chen, March 2019. Delivered, Mr. Kowalski, July 2020.
Delivered, Father O'Brien, December 2021. Delivered. Marcus had puzzled over the tags. His father had not run a watch repair business, at least not one Marcus had ever heard about. There was no storefront, no advertisements, no public record of any enterprise. Yet these tags suggested his father had been repairing watches for people, delivering them, perhaps even doing it for free. The notebook had not mentioned payment, only the technical details of the repairs. This morning, as Marcus sipped his coffee and watched the light shift across the table, he decided to investigate further. If his father had been helping people in town, someone would know about it. Someone would have stories. And Marcus found himself hungry for those stories, for every scrap of information that would help him understand the man who had remained a mystery for so long. He stood, grabbed his jacket, and called to Ranger. The dog rose immediately, stretching his long body before trotting to the door. They walked together into town, the cool mountain air crisp and clean. Ridgemont was waking up slowly, shops opening their doors, people emerging for their morning routines. Marcus headed to the diner, a small establishment called Mabel's that his father had apparently frequented every Saturday. Inside, the smell of coffee and bacon filled the air. A handful of customers sat at the counter, and in the booths, their conversations a low murmur beneath the clatter of dishes. Marcus took a seat at the counter, and within moments a woman in her 60s approached, coffee pot in hand. Her name tag read Mabel. "You must be James's boy," she said, her voice carrying a warm familiarity, as if she had known him for years. "I heard you were back in town." "Coffee?" Marcus nodded, and she poured a steaming cup, the dark liquid filling the white ceramic mug. He wrapped his hands around it, feeling the heat seep into his palms. "I wanted to ask you about my father," he said. "About the watches." Mabel's face softened, a knowing smile crossing her lips. She set the coffee pot down and leaned against the counter. "Oh, the watches. Your father was a magician with those things. Do you know how many people in this town owe him a debt of gratitude?" Marcus shook his head. "I am just starting to find out." Mabel gestured to a booth in the corner. "Come sit. I will tell you a story." Marcus followed her, Ranger settling quietly beneath the table. Mabel slid into the seat across from him, her hands folded on the table. "About 8 years ago, she began. My husband Frank was diagnosed with Parkinson's. It was devastating. He had been a contractor his whole life, worked with his hands, built half the houses in this town. Losing control of his hands, his coordination, it broke something in him. He fell into a deep depression. Stopped talking much, stopped going out. One of the only things he had left from his father was an old pocket watch, a family heirloom. It had stopped working years before, and we had taken it to a jeweler in Boulder, but they said it was too far gone, not worth the cost to repair." She paused, her eyes distant, remembering. "One day, your father came in here for his usual Saturday coffee. He noticed Frank sitting in the corner, just staring out the window. James was not one for small talk, as you probably know, but he walked over and sat down. He asked Frank what was wrong. Frank showed him the pocket watch, told him the story.
Your father took that watch, looked at it for a long moment, and then he said, "I can fix this. Give me a month." Mabel's eyes glistened. A month later, James came back. He handed Frank that pocket watch, and it was running perfectly. The case was polished, the crystal replaced, the movement singing like new. Frank wound it up and just held it, listening to it tick. He started crying right there in the booth. Your father did not ask for payment. He refused it when Frank tried to give him money. He just said, "It is good to fix things that matter." Marcus felt a tightness in his chest. His father had done this for a stranger, for a man suffering, and asked for nothing in return. How many others? He asked quietly. Mabel laughed softly. "Oh, honey, dozens. Maybe more." He never advertised, never made a big deal of it, but word got around. People would come to him with broken watches, family heirlooms, things that had sentimental value but no monetary worth. He would fix them, take his time, make them perfect, and give them back. Sometimes he would not even tell people he was working on their watch. He would just show up one day and hand it over, all repaired and beautiful. Marcus stared into his coffee, processing this. His father had been quietly healing the town, one timepiece at a time, restoring not just mechanisms but memories, connections to the past, pieces of identity that people thought were lost forever. It was an act of profound generosity, done in silence, without recognition or reward. He stayed at the diner for another hour, listening to Mabel's stories. She told him about Mrs. Chen, an elderly widow whose late husband had given her a watch on their wedding day. James had repaired it so she could hear its familiar ticking beside her bed at night. She told him about Father O'Brien, the local priest, whose grandfather's railroad watch had been restored, just in time for him to pass it down to his own nephew. Each story was a thread in the tapestry of his father's hidden life, a life defined not by words but by service. When Marcus finally left the diner, the sun was high in the sky. He walked through town with a new awareness, seeing the place through his father's eyes. This was not just a small mountain community. It was a network of people his father had quietly cared for, a web of connections built not through conversation, but through the careful, patient work of his hands. He stopped by the hardware store, a cluttered but well-stocked shop called Ridgemont Supply. The owner, a burly man in his 50s named Tom Bradley, greeted him with a firm handshake. "You are James's son," he said. "I was sorry to hear about your father. He was a good customer and a good man." Marcus browsed the aisles, picking up a few supplies he needed for the house, and as he paid he asked, "Did my father ever repair a watch for you?" Tom's face lit up. "He did. About 5 years ago, my daughter graduated from high school. My father, her grandfather, had passed away a few years before that, and he had left her his old wristwatch. It was a cheap thing, nothing fancy, but it had been his daily watch for 40 years. It stopped working, and I thought it was done for. I mentioned it to James one day when he came in for some screws, and he asked if he could take a look. 2 weeks later, he brought it back, running perfectly. My daughter wore it at her graduation. She still wears it now." Marcus thanked him and left his mind churning. Every person he spoke to had a story. His father had been a ghost in his own home, but in the wider world of Ridgemont, he had been a quiet guardian, a fixer of broken things, a preserver of memories. That afternoon, Marcus returned to the workshop with renewed purpose. He began to go through the remaining watches more carefully, reading each tag, cross-referencing names with the notebook. Some watches were marked as delivered, but others were not. They were simply labeled with a name and a date, waiting. Marcus realized these were watches his father had been working on when he died, projects left incomplete, promises unfulfilled. There were 5 of them: a pocket watch belonging to someone named Garrison, a lady's wristwatch for a person named Ellison, a mantle clock for someone called Herrera, a vintage diver's watch for someone named Patel, and a chronograph for someone named Sullivan. Each one represented a person in town, waiting for their heirloom to be returned, not knowing that the man who had promised to fix it was gone. Marcus made a decision. He would finish these repairs. He would complete his father's work, not just the custom watch meant for him, but all of it. He would deliver these timepieces to their owners, and in doing so he would continue his father's legacy of quiet service. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus worked with an intensity that surprised him. He had always been disciplined, but this was different. This was driven not by duty or orders, but by love. Each watch presented its own challenges. The pocket watch for Garrison had a broken mainspring that needed to be carefully replaced. The lady's wristwatch for Ellison had a damaged crown that required machining a custom replacement. The mantle clock for Herrera needed a complete overhaul, every gear cleaned and oiled, every pivot polished. Marcus made mistakes. He stripped a screw on the diver's watch and had to extract it with a specialized tool. He miscalculated the length of a spring on the chronograph and had to start over. But with each mistake came learning, and with each success came confidence. He was not just repairing watches. He was learning a craft, apprenticing under the ghost of his father, guided by the meticulous notes left behind. Ranger was his constant companion, lying patiently in the corner, occasionally lifting his head to watch Marcus work. The dog seemed to understand the importance of what was happening, the sacredness of the space. He did not disturb, did not demand attention, just offered his quiet presence. Finally, after 2 weeks of focused work, all 5 watches were complete. Marcus wrapped each one carefully in soft cloth and placed them in small boxes. He consulted the notebook for addresses, finding that his father had noted where each person lived. The next day he set out to deliver them. The first stop was a modest home on the east side of town. The name on the mailbox read Garrison. Marcus knocked on the door, and it was opened by a man in his 70s, thin and frail, with kind blue eyes. Marcus introduced himself, explained who he was, and handed over the box containing the pocket watch. The man's hands trembled as he opened it, his eyes widening when he saw the gleaming brass case. "James fixed this," the man whispered. "He said he would, but then I heard he passed, and I thought it was lost." "He did most of the work," Marcus said quietly. "I just finished it." The man wound the watch, held it to his ear, and a tear rolled down his weathered cheek. "This was my father's watch. He carried it through World War II. I thought I would never hear it tick again. Please tell your father. Tell him thank you." Marcus nodded, his throat tight. "I will." The second delivery was to a woman named Ellison, a school teacher in her 50s, who lived in a small cottage near the center of town. When Marcus handed her the restored lady's wristwatch, she gasped. "This belonged to my grandmother," she said, her voice breaking. "She raised me after my parents died. This was the only thing I had left of hers, and when it stopped working, I felt like I had lost her all over again. Your father promised he would bring her back to me, and he did." The third, fourth, and fifth deliveries were similar. Each person was overwhelmed with gratitude. Each watch represented a connection to someone they had loved and lost, a tangible piece of the past made whole again. Marcus saw his father's impact not in grand gestures or public recognition, but in these small, intimate moments of restoration and healing. As he drove home after the final delivery, Marcus felt something shift inside him. He had spent 20 years believing his father did not care, that the silence between them was evidence of indifference, but the truth was so much more complex. His father had cared deeply, not just about Marcus, but about everyone in his orbit. He had simply expressed that care in a language Marcus had not understood, the language of repair, of patience, of quiet, steady service. That evening, back in the workshop, Marcus sat at the bench and opened the notebook to a section he had not yet fully explored. It was near the middle, the pages slightly more worn, as if his father had returned to them often. The entries here were different from the technical notes.
They were more reflective, almost philosophical. One entry, dated 12 years ago, stood out. A watch is a machine designed to measure time, but when you repair one, you are doing something more than fixing a mechanism. You are restoring a relationship between a person and their past. Every watch tells a story. The man who carried it, the woman who wore it, the moments it measured. When someone brings me a broken watch, they are not asking me to fix metal and springs. They are asking me to give them back something they have lost. A memory, a connection, a piece of themselves. This is sacred work. I am honored to do it. Marcus read the passage 3 times, each word sinking deeper into his understanding. His father had not been cold or distant. He had been a man with a profound sense of purpose, a man who understood that love could be expressed through action, through care, through the patient restoration of what was broken. He turned the page, and his breath caught. The next entry was not about a watch, it was about him. Marcus is 16 today. I made him breakfast, pancakes like his mother used to make, but he barely touched them. He is pulling away from me, and I do not know how to stop it. I want to tell him I love him, that I am proud of him, that I see the young man he is becoming, but the words will not come. They never do. When Anne was alive, she was the bridge between us. She knew how to translate my silence into something Marcus could understand. Without her, I am lost. I am a watchmaker who cannot fix the most important thing in his life. The distance between my son and me. Marcus closed his eyes, the weight of the words crushing. His father had known. He had felt the growing rift, had wanted desperately to close it, but had not known how. The silence that Marcus had interpreted as rejection had actually been paralysis, a profound inability to speak the language of emotion. He read on, entry after entry, each one a small window into his father's heart. There were entries about Marcus's high school graduation, about the day he left for basic training, about every holiday and birthday that passed without contact. Each entry was tinged with regret, with longing, with a love that had no outlet, and then Marcus found it. The entry that changed everything. It was dated 9 years ago, just a few months after Marcus had completed his first deployment overseas. Received a letter today from a collection agency. Marcus got into some trouble before he left, a fender bender with the Henderson family's car. The insurance did not cover it all, and there was a balance owed. $3,000. I could have told him about it when it happened, could have made him face it, but I did not want to add to his burden. He was preparing to deploy, to put his life on the line for his country. I thought I could handle it quietly, pay it off over time, but the interest has grown, and now they are threatening legal action. The timing could not be worse. If this goes to court, if it affects his security clearance, it could derail his entire career. I cannot let that happen. I will not let my silence hurt him again. Marcus's hands shook as he turned the page. The next entry was brief. Sold my father's coin collection today. It was the only thing of value I had left. It brought in $2,800. Combined with what I had saved, it was enough to settle the debt in full. I called the collection agency, paid it off, and had them send a letter confirming Marcus's account is clear. He will never know. That is how it should be. A father protects his son, even from his own mistakes, especially from his own mistakes. Marcus stared at the page, his vision blurring. The coin collection. He remembered it vaguely, a leather-bound album filled with rare coins his grandfather had collected over a lifetime. His father had kept it in a safe in the closet, had shown it to Marcus once when he was a child, explaining that it was a family treasure, something to be passed down, and his father had sold it, not for himself, but to protect Marcus, to ensure that a stupid mistake Marcus had made as a teenager would not destroy the future he was building. Marcus had never known about the debt. He had never received a call, never been contacted by a collection agency. His father had handled it silently, absorbing the cost, sacrificing something precious to keep Marcus's path clear.
It was an act of love so profound, so selfless, that Marcus felt the full weight of it crash over him. He stood abruptly, the stool scraping against the floor. He paced the small room, his mind racing. His father had given up a family heirloom, something irreplaceable, to save him. And Marcus had spent the last 9 years believing his father did not care, that the silence was punishment rather than protection. Ranger rose and came to him, pressing his solid body against Marcus's legs, grounding him. Marcus sank to the floor, his back against the workbench, and Ranger lay down beside him, resting his head on Marcus's lap. They sat like that for a long time, the man and the dog, in the quiet workshop surrounded by the evidence of a father's unspoken love. Marcus thought about the custom watch on his wrist, the one his father had spent years building for him. He thought about the letters never sent, the repairs done for strangers, the coin collection sacrificed. Every action had been an attempt to say what his father could not put into words. I love you. I am proud of you. I will protect you, even at great cost to myself. The silence had not been empty. It had been full, brimming with emotion that had no voice, with love that had no language except the language of sacrifice and service. Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for Helen Ortiz, the postmaster who had worked with his father. He hesitated for only a moment, then pressed call. She answered on the third ring. Helen, this is Marcus Webb. I need to ask you something. Did my father ever mention a coin collection? There was a pause, then a soft sigh. Oh, Marcus. Yes, he did. He was heartbroken when he sold it. He came to me after, needed someone to talk to. I think. He told me it was his father's collection, that it was supposed to go to you one day, but he said there were more important things than coins. He said keeping you safe, keeping your future secure, that was what mattered. He made me promise not to tell you, if you ever came back. He said you would feel guilty, and guilt was a burden he did not want you to carry. Marcus closed his eyes. Thank you, Helen. Thank you for telling me. He ended the call, and sat in the silence of the workshop, the full truth finally clear. His father had been a man of profound love and profound sacrifice, a man who had expressed his care through action rather than words, through protection rather than proclamation, and Marcus, in his youth and pain, had misunderstood it all. But now he knew, and knowing changed everything. Marcus spent the rest of the evening in the workshop, not working on watches, but simply sitting absorbing the weight of what he had discovered. The room felt different now. Not just a hidden sanctuary, but a cathedral, a sacred space where his father had poured out his heart in the only way he knew how. He thought about his own life, about the years spent in the military, the walls he had built around himself, the distance he had maintained from everyone. He had become his father in so many ways, expressing care through duty and discipline rather than words, showing love through action rather than affection. The realization was both painful and liberating. He understood now. He understood his father, and in understanding his father, he understood himself. The path forward was clear. He would not sell the house. He would not return to Austin and his empty, controlled life. He would stay in Ridgemont. He would continue his father's work. He would learn the craft fully, become a master horologist in his own right, and he would carry on the tradition of quiet service that his father had established. He would repair watches for people who needed their memories restored, their connections preserved, and in doing so, he would honor the man who had loved him more than he had ever known. Ranger stirred beside him, lifting his head, his amber eyes reflecting the warm light of the workshop. Marcus reached down and scratched behind the dog's ears, a gesture of gratitude. Good boy, he whispered. You brought me here. You made me see. The dog's tail thumped softly against the floor, a simple acknowledgement. They sat together in the quiet, surrounded by the ticking of 100 clocks, each one a heartbeat, each one a reminder that time was precious, that moments mattered, that love, even unspoken, endured. Spring arrived in the mountains with a gentle insistence, melting the last stubborn patches of snow and coaxing green shoots from the dark earth. The aspens along Pinecrest Drive unfurled their leaves, creating a canopy of trembling silver green that caught the sunlight and scattered it in dancing patterns across the ground. Marcus had been in Ridgemont for 4 months now, and the house on the cul-de-sac no longer felt like a tomb of memories. It felt like a home. He had made changes, subtle but significant. He had repainted the exterior, choosing a warm grey that complemented the natural stone foundation. He had replaced the broken fence posts in the backyard, rebuilt the sagging porch steps, and cleared the overgrown flower beds his mother had once tended. In the evenings, he would sit on the porch with Ranger at his feet, watching the sun set behind the peaks, and he would feel something he had not felt in 20 years, peace. But the most significant change was not visible from the outside. It was in him. The rigid soldier, the man who had operated on discipline and distance, had softened. He smiled more easily now. He greeted neighbors by name. He stopped at the diner for coffee not because he needed caffeine, but because he enjoyed the conversations. He was learning to live not in the shadow of the past, but in the light of understanding. The workshop remained his sanctuary, but it had evolved. It was no longer just his father's space, it was theirs, a shared legacy. Marcus had added his own touches, a corkboard where he pinned photographs of completed repairs and the people who owned them, a small shelf for the books on horology he had collected, a comfortable chair where he could sit and read his father's notebook, which he did often, finding new wisdom in the pages each time. He had also begun to build his own reputation in Ridgemont. Word had spread that James Webb's son was continuing his father's work, and people began to appear at the door with broken timepieces, hesitant requests written on their faces. Marcus welcomed them all. He took on every repair, no matter how small, no matter how challenging. Each one was an opportunity to practice his craft, to connect with someone, to honor his father's legacy of service. One afternoon in late April, a knock came at the door. Marcus answered to find a young woman in her late 20s standing on the porch. She had dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, kind brown eyes, and she held a small wooden box in her hands. She introduced herself as Sophie Herrera, the daughter of the man who had received the repaired mantel clock. "My father told me what you did," she said, her voice soft but earnest. "Finishing the work your dad started. It meant the world to him. That clock belonged to my grandmother, and hearing it chime again, it brought him so much joy." Marcus felt a warmth spread through his chest. "I am glad I could help." Sophie hesitated, then held out the box. "I have a favor to ask. This is my grandfather's pocket watch. It stopped working years ago, and my dad tried to have it repaired, but no one could fix it. Your father looked at it once and said it was beyond his skill, that it needed someone with more training. But I was wondering, hoping really, if you might take a look. I know it is a long shot." Marcus took the box, opened it, and examined the watch inside.
It was an old piece, early 1900s, Swiss-made, with a complicated movement featuring multiple complications. A calendar function, a moon phase indicator, a chronograph. It was far more complex than anything he had tackled so far. The kind of watch that would test every skill he had learned. He looked up at Sophie, saw the hope in her eyes, and made a decision. "I will do my best. It might take me some time. I need to study it, maybe order some parts, but I will try." Her face lit up with gratitude. "Thank you. That is all I can ask." After she left, Marcus carried the watch down to the workshop and set it on the bench. Ranger, who had been napping in his usual corner, lifted his head and watched as Marcus carefully opened the case back and examined the movement. It was a masterpiece of mechanical engineering, a labyrinth of gears and levers and springs, and it was broken in multiple places. The chronograph mechanism was seized. The calendar function was jammed. The moon phase disc was cracked. Marcus sat back, exhaling slowly. This was beyond him. At least for now. He needed help, guidance.
the kind of expertise that could only come from a master. He thought for a moment, then pulled out his phone and began to search. After an hour of research, he found what he was looking for. A master horologist named Robert Finch, who ran a small workshop in Denver and was known for taking on apprentices. Marcus called the number, half expecting to reach a voicemail, but Robert answered, his voice gruff but not unkind. Marcus explained who he was, where he was calling from, and what he was hoping to learn. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Your father," Robert said finally. "James Webb. I knew him, not well, but we crossed paths at a few trade shows over the years. He was a talented man, self-taught, if I remember correctly." Marcus felt a jolt of surprise. "You knew my father, like I said, not well, but I respected his work. If you are his son, and you are serious about learning this craft, I will teach you. But I do not take students lightly. This is not a hobby, it is a discipline. Are you prepared to commit?" Marcus thought about the workshop, about the watches waiting to be repaired, about the legacy his father had left him. "I am prepared." "Good. Come to Denver next week. Bring tools if you have them, and bring that complicated watch. We will see what you are made of." Over the following months, Marcus divided his time between Ridgemont and Denver. Twice a week, he would make the 3-hour drive to Robert's workshop, a cramped but immaculately organized space in an old industrial building. Robert was a demanding teacher, precise and unforgiving of sloppy work, but also patient and generous with his knowledge. He taught Marcus the finer points of the craft, how to true a balance wheel to within microns, how to fabricate a replacement part, using only a lathe and hand files, how to diagnose problems not by sight but by sound, listening to the subtle irregularities in a movement's rhythm. Marcus absorbed everything, his mind sharp and focused. The discipline he had learned in the military translated well to the watchmaker's bench. The patience required to complete a repair mirrored the patience required to wait for the right moment in combat. The attention to detail, the steady hands, the refusal to accept anything less than perfection. It was all familiar territory. Ranger adapted to the new routine with his usual calm. On the days Marcus traveled to Denver, the dog would accompany him, sleeping in the truck during lessons and exploring the city during breaks. On the days they stayed in Ridgemont, Ranger would lie in the workshop, a silent companion, his presence a constant source of comfort. By midsummer, Marcus had progressed enough that Robert allowed him to attempt the repair of Sophie's grandfather's pocket watch under supervision. It took 6 weeks of meticulous work, disassembling the movement completely, cleaning every component, fabricating new parts for the broken pieces, reassembling everything with precision, testing and adjusting until the watch ran flawlessly. When Marcus finally held the completed watch to his ear and heard the complex symphony of its movement, the chronograph ticking, the calendar advancing, the moon phase rotating through its cycle, he felt a surge of pride unlike anything he had experienced in his military career. He delivered the watch to Sophie on a warm August afternoon. She opened the box, her hands trembling, and when she saw the watch running perfectly, she burst into tears. "My grandfather carried this through the Depression," she said, her voice breaking, "through the war, through everything. And now it lives again. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you so much." Marcus drove home that day with a sense of fulfillment that was deep and lasting. He was not just repairing watches, he was restoring pieces of people's lives, giving them back fragments of their history, helping them maintain connections to the people they had loved and lost. It was sacred work, just as his father had written, and Marcus felt honored to do it. As autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Marcus made another decision. He would formalize what he had been doing informally. He would open a small repair shop, a modest operation run from the house, where people could bring their broken timepieces and know they would be treated with care and respect. He would call it Webb & Son Horological Services, a name that honored his father and acknowledged the partnership that existed across time and silence. He had a sign made, a simple wooden placard, with the name carved in elegant letters, and he mounted it beside the front door. He placed a small advertisement in the local newspaper and created a basic website with photographs of his work. He did not expect much. This was a small town, and the demand for traditional watch repair was limited, but he was content with that. This was not about building an empire, it was about continuing a legacy. The response surprised him. Within weeks, people from across the region were contacting him, not just locals, but collectors, enthusiasts, people who had heard about his work and wanted to entrust their precious timepieces to someone who treated them as more than just objects. Marcus took on each project with the same care and attention, never rushing, never cutting corners, always striving for perfection. He also began teaching. A local high school student named Daniel, whose grandfather had been a machinist, expressed interest in learning the craft. Marcus took him on as an informal apprentice, teaching him the basics, showing him the tools, explaining the philosophy behind the work. It felt right, passing on what he had learned, ensuring that the knowledge would not die with him. One crisp October morning, as Marcus sat at the workbench adjusting the balance of a vintage chronometer, he heard a familiar voice calling from upstairs. He climbed the basement stairs to find Helen Ortiz standing in the entryway, a warm smile on her face. "I hope I am not intruding," she said. "I wanted to stop by and see how you were doing. The whole town is talking about what you have built here." Marcus invited her in, made coffee, and they sat at the kitchen table. Helen told him stories about his father, anecdotes from their years working together at the post office. She spoke about his reliability, his kindness, his quiet sense of humor that few people got to see. And then she said something that struck Marcus deeply. "Your father used to say that time was the only thing we could not get back. That is why he fixed watches. He believed that by keeping a timepiece running, he was helping someone hold on to their past, keep it alive and present. He saw it as a way of fighting against loss, against forgetting. He once told me that every watch he repaired was a small victory against time itself." Marcus felt the words settle into him, a final piece of understanding clicking into place. His father had not been running from emotion. He had been grappling with it in the deepest way possible, through his work, through the careful preservation of memory and connection. The workshop had been his battlefield, and every repaired watch had been a life saved, a memory preserved, a piece of the past brought forward into the present. That evening Marcus sat in the workshop with his father's notebook open before him. He turned to a blank page near the end and picked up a pen. For the first time he added his own entry. "Dad, I understand now. I understand why you built this place, why you spent so many hours down here. I understand the silence. It was not emptiness. It was fullness, too much feeling to fit into words. You showed your love the only way you knew how, through your hands, through your work, through sacrifice. I wish I had seen it sooner. I wish I had come home while you were still here, but I am home now, and I am continuing what you started. Every watch I repair, I do it in your name. Every person I help, I do it because you taught me, through your example, what it means to serve. I love you, Dad. I always will. Your son, Marcus." He set the pen down and closed the notebook gently. Ranger, now graying more noticeably around the muzzle, came over and rested his head on Marcus's knee. Marcus scratched behind the dog's ears, grateful beyond words for the animal who had led him to this discovery, who had refused to let him walk away from the truth. Winter returned to the mountains, blanketing Ridgemont in snow, but the house on Pennycrest Drive was warm. Marcus kept a fire burning in the fireplace, the first fires the hearth had seen in years. He hung stockings at Christmas, not because he expected gifts, but because his mother had done so, and it felt right to honor that tradition. He invited neighbors over for coffee, hosted a small gathering on New Year's Eve, and slowly the house filled with life again. In the workshop, the clocks ticked their eternal rhythms, marking the passage of moments that Marcus no longer took for granted. He worked steadily, patiently, repairing timepieces, teaching Daniel, learning new techniques from Robert. He was building something that would last, something that honored the past while reaching toward the future. On a clear February morning, almost a year after he had first returned to Ridgemont, Marcus received a package in the mail. It was from an auction house in Boulder. Inside was a letter and a photograph. The letter explained that an estate sale had recently taken place, and among the items sold was a coin collection that had been purchased by a private collector. That collector, upon learning the history of the collection through the auction house, had decided to return it to the family it originally belonged to. The photograph showed his grandfather's leather-bound album, the one his father had sacrificed. Marcus sat at the kitchen table, holding the letter, tears streaming down his face. The collection was coming home, not because he had sought it out, not because he had demanded restitution, but because someone, a stranger, had recognized the importance of returning what was lost. It felt like a gift from his father, a final act of grace reaching across the divide between life and death. When the collection arrived 2 weeks later, Marcus placed it in a position of honor on the mantel above the fireplace, next to the photograph of his mother and a new photograph he had added, a picture of his father, taken years ago, standing in front of the house, a rare small smile on his face. Marcus stood back and looked at the mantel, at the assembled pieces of his family's history. He wore the custom watch his father had made for him, its steady ticking a reminder of the connection that had always existed, even when he could not see it. Ranger sat beside him, tail wagging slowly, amber eyes reflecting the firelight. This was home, not the building, not the walls and roof, but the understanding, the reconciliation, the love finally acknowledged and embraced. Marcus had come back to bury his father and close a chapter. Instead, he had discovered a story that was still being written, a legacy that was still unfolding, a love that had never died. He thought about the future, about the watches he would repair, the people he would help, the apprentices he would teach, about the possibility someday of a family of his own, children who would grow up in this house, who would learn the craft, who would carry the name Webb forward with pride and purpose. But most of all, he thought about his father, about the silent man who had loved so deeply, who had given so much, who had built a sanctuary beneath the house where he could express what his heart could not speak. Marcus understood him now, and in understanding, he had found not just his father, but himself. The workshop would remain open, the tools ready, the clocks ticking their eternal song, and Marcus, the veteran who had once run from this place, would stay rooted at last, continuing the work his father had begun, speaking the language of repair and restoration, of patience and precision, of love made tangible through the steady, careful work of healing what was broken. Up next, you have got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you will not want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.